A man enters a hotel suite in Washington, D.C. He thinks he's meeting allies, potential donors, fellow travelers, the kind of people you level with when you think the mics are off.
Nice to meet you.
He's middle-aged with a graying beard and owlish glasses. He looks like any nondescript, boring bureaucrat in Washington with his button-down shirt and suit jacket.
Would you like coffee or something? I'd love coffee, yeah. Great.
He sinks into a couch across from two other men who nod along, listening to his ideas. But what he describes is pretty far outside the mainstream.
You have the largest deportation in history.
He explains how the next president could deploy America's armed forces.
The president has, the ability both along the border and elsewhere to maintain law and order with the military.
He talks about how the independence of certain agencies needs to be, in his word, destroyed.
80% of my time is working on the plans of what's necessary to take control of these bureaucracies.
He'd already been all over the media talking about cutting off funding for institutions that he loathed.
We need to have a significant debate in this country about whether we need a Department of Education that is pushing critical race theory into our local school districts.
And he told his hosts in that Washington hotel room how he's prepared to make it all happen quickly, armed as he is with legal arguments, draft regulations, and rabidly loyal personnel.
I want to be the person who crushes the deep state.
The two men sitting across from him are undercover journalists from the Center for Climate Reporting. And to them, all this sounds less like a policy briefing and more like a plan for domination. And at one point, almost joking, the man compares the operation that he's building to a certain space station in Star Wars.
The Death Star that is accomplishing all the debates that you are reading about.
That's not exactly what you want to hear from someone working on plans for running the federal government.
Fear will keep the local systems in line. Fear of this battle station.
This man was building on the legacy of Darth Cheney before him, but he wanted to use the Death Star to destroy Alderaan, or the deep state. He wanted to bring the entire federal bureaucracy to heel under one single president.
This station is now the ultimate power in the universe. I suggest we use it.
And these are not the sentiments of some fringe crank.
There's no think tank, no policy organization, no battle plan creator other than us for the worldview that I think Donald Trump has.
Those are the words of Russell Vought, the once and future director of Donald Trump's Office of Management and Budget. He's calmly explaining what he and the other Kingmakers think Donald Trump's second term should look like. This conversation took place in August 2024, before Trump was elected to that second term. And the operation that Vought was describing had a name: Project 2025. Over 900 pages of policy plans, a database of vetted and approved personnel, a set of proposed executive orders ready to be signed and implemented on day one.
Hours after becoming the 47th president, Donald Trump began signing dozens of executive orders.
This should sound pretty familiar if you listen to our episode about the Heritage Foundation's Mandate for Leadership and President Reagan.
The Heritage Foundation provided us with copies of the remarkable 1,093-page work, Mandate for Leadership. The material combined mastery of the federal bureaucracy with a no-nonsense plan to cut it down to size.
That original 1980 Mandate for Leadership was the great-granddaddy of Project 2025, a new no-nonsense blueprint for a new no-nonsense conservative administration. The Kingmakers had watched Donald Trump fall short in his first term, stymied by the courts, Congress, and insufficiently loyal members of the executive branch. But this time around, things would be different, not least because the Kingmakers had some new weapons in their arsenal, including the unitary executive theory and a man with plans for making that theory into reality.
We want to put them in trauma.
I'm David Sirota, and this is Master Plan.
Power.
What about the master plan, huh? Thinking of a master plan.
Maybe we like a dictator.
Executive power.
I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward.
Let's go back to the year 2014, 10 years before those undercover journalists recorded Russell Vought. Barack Obama was in his last years as president, and ever since his re-election, a rabid faction of Republicans had been blocking his legislative agenda. For 2 years, they'd hamstrung President Obama's nominations.
Senate Republicans are once again blocking some presidential nominees. Yesterday, 2 nominations failed within less than an hour.
They'd stymied legislation, like the bipartisan gun control bill introduced in the wake of that horrifying Sandy Hook elementary school shooting.
The bipartisan compromise to expand background checks on guns just failed to break a Republican filibuster. The vote was 54-46.
Republicans had introduced bills and tried to undo legislation that had already passed, like Obamacare.
Mr. Speaker, today we are once again voting to totally repeal the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, Obamacare.
And when all else failed, Republicans tried to force the administration's hand.
It was a long day of wait and see as the federal government headed toward potential shutdown.
In a standoff over passing the federal budget, Republicans had refused to fund the government unless all money for Obamacare was stripped out. At one point, Republican Senator Ted Cruz gave a 21-hour speech in support of defunding Obamacare, which included a reading of Dr. Seuss.
Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam I am. I do not like green eggs and ham.
And Obama realized that if he was going to get anything done in the last 2 years of his presidency, he was going to have to do something different.
But I'm also going to act on my own if Congress is deadlocked. I've got a pen to take executive actions where Congress won't.
You might not think this would have been an issue for Obama. After all, in the last episode, we heard how his administration pushed the limits of presidential power on national security.
Will we ever really know whether there is indeed a CIA kill list?
The Obama administration even authorized drone strikes against American citizens without judicial oversight.
The son of U.S.-born militant was among those killed in a trio drone attacks Friday night in Yemen.
But as willing as President Obama was to push the envelope on executive power in the realm of national security, he was initially reluctant to take that kind of executive action on domestic policy.
My job in the executive branch is supposed to be to carry out the laws that are passed.
But President Obama had come up against a new kind of Republican, the populist, fire-breathing kind, conservatives who had no interest in compromise or working with the Obama administration. This group of Republican politicians was influenced by a small outside group known as Groundswell. These were conservatives who'd spent the Reagan and Bush administrations arguing for executive authority, and yet they were vehemently opposed to President Obama doing the same. According to documents obtained by Mother Jones, Groundswell's members included people like Ginny Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. It also included John Bolton, former Attorney General Ed Meese, as well as top aides to conservative politicians like Ted Cruz. And the group was connected with conservative strategists like Steve Bannon. By the way, if you're playing master plan bingo, the names in that last paragraph should have netted you at least 3 squares.
Bingo!
But there were some new faces in there too, including a 36-year-old named Russell Vought. Vought started his career in 1999 as a Capitol Hill aide to conservative lawmakers. Then he worked for the Republican Study Committee, the largest conservative caucus in Congress.
He had climbed the ranks within the House Republican leadership structure.
That's Andy Kroll. He's an investigative reporter at ProPublica, and he's written and reported extensively about Russell Vought.
He seemed to be on the path toward one of these classic inside baseball Washington power brokers. He was making all the right moves, courting all of the right mentors, and so on.
Then Vought left Capitol Hill to join a new organization, an offshoot of the Heritage Foundation. He, like other conservative firebrands, wanted to take the Heritage Foundation's clout in Washington and channel it into something more assertive, something that matched the populist grassroots energy of the up-and-coming Tea Party political movement.
They come up with this idea to create a more aggressive, more activist-focused offshoot of Heritage called Heritage Action.
Heritage Action for America was a tax-exempt advocacy/lobbying organization, and Russell Vought became the organization's vice president and political advisor. At first, the group was focused on forcing Republican members of Congress to uphold conservative values, or see that those congressmen were replaced by people who would.
Heritage Action essentially says, we're going to pick certain bills that we think are litmus tests about whether you're a real conservative or not.
Republicans swept the House in 2010, but Obama's re-election 2 years later convinced Russ Vought and other conservatives they needed a more hardcore strategy. So Heritage Action, alongside Groundswell, coordinated with the most extreme conservative members of Congress to devise ways of blocking President Obama in his second term. Which brings us to 2014.
People were pressing him to take bolder action.
That's John Podesta, who spoke with us for this series. He served as counselor to President Obama from 2014 to 2015. Prior to that, he'd founded the Center for American Progress, a progressive think tank where I briefly worked with him about 25 years ago. And John Podesta was among the people in the White House who encouraged Barack Obama to take more aggressive executive actions in his second term to try to get around Republican obstructionists in Congress.
The president had the ability to move forward across a range of fronts, both to implement the legislation that he had worked so hard to pass, but also to be able to use existing authority.
With his legislative options blocked, President Obama reached for the same levers that he had once criticized Darth Cheney for using.
Give yourself to the dark side.
His administration began bypassing Congress altogether, issuing new regulations by reinterpreting existing law. He unilaterally expanded immigration programs like the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, aka the Dreamers. He introduced DAPA, which would protect the immigrant parents of American citizens.
An executive order that blocks any potential for mass deportations.
Obama's administration also used executive authority to introduce new regulations to clamp down on coal-fired power plants.
Environmentalists and many Democrats praised the executive order to cut carbon emissions by 30% by the year 2030.
And Obama used an executive order to unilaterally raise the minimum wage on federal contracts.
From $7.25 an hour to $10.10.
As President Obama's supporters cheered him on, the Republican right exploded.
Process matters to self-government. Sometimes it is the only barrier to tyranny, and Mr. Obama's policy by executive order is tearing at the fabric of national consent.
It is like we're going to put the Constitution up on a wall and Obama is going to start shooting a BB gun at it.
Yes, that's right. The Unitarians were suddenly pretending to be offended by executive action.
Congress makes the laws. What the president did in this order is said, I am not enforcing the laws that you have passed.
The president of the United States went on national television and announced that he is defying the Constitution.
The same Republicans who shrugged at Dick Cheney's torture memos and warrantless surveillance now accused Barack Obama of running an imperial presidency.
President Obama admitted last week that I just took an action to change the law, end quote, and I should add a jeweled crown worthy of King James of England.
Conservatives like Russell Vought observed the Obama administration using presidential power in an aggressive way. They saw the Obama administration use federal agencies to push regulations that supported a progressive agenda, and they did not like it. Here's Andy Kroll again.
I do think Vought watched Obama, and that maybe almost radicalized him on this idea of an out-of-control deep state, unelected bureaucrats, unaccountable to the American people who need to be put back in their place or who need to be removed from the federal government because they're out of control.
By 2014, the Republicans were already talking about who would be their party's presidential nominee for the 2016 election. Among the contenders were people like Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, and Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker. The list went on and on. These were candidates with sterling conservative credentials, men with whom you'd think someone like Russ Vought would have been in perfect alignment. But then there was this guy.
With the exception of the late, great Abraham Lincoln, I can be more presidential than any president that's ever held this office. That I can tell you.
In June 2015, Donald Trump announced that he would also be throwing his hat into the ring. Trump was about as far from being a political insider as anyone could be, with a background in real estate and reality television. The guy had even been a Democrat for a few years.
By the time Trump is the Republican nominee in 2016, Vought is so fed up with both political parties and what he sees as a permanent political class in Washington that Trump could be this battering ram.
Trump was an outsider, a candidate who hadn't spent decades hobnobbing around Washington, schmoozing with politicians and corporate lobbyists. Trump was someone with the potential to shake things up. And his authoritarian tendencies had already been on display as he played CEO on national television.
You're fired.
And in Trump, the Kingmakers, including Russell Vought, saw an opportunity. That's coming up after the break.
Voters get the last word in the election of a lifetime.
The polls said he would lose.
Hillary Clinton seeking to break the ultimate glass ceiling.
His own campaign expected him to lose.
Donald Trump hoping to shatter expectations again.
Even Donald Trump seemed surprised that a man whose resume included steaks, pageants, casinos, and leaked Access Hollywood tapes.
You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab him by the pussy.
Even Trump himself didn't seem to think he'd actually win the 2016 presidential election. And yet,
Donald J. Trump will become the 45th president of the United States.
The Trump team in 2016 was caught flat-footed. They had no real plans in place if he won, let alone for the transition to a new administration.
Donald Trump's administration will have about 4,000 government positions to fill, but right now, the transition team is in disarray with firings, infighting, and a breakdown in communications with world leaders.
His picks for cabinet positions were unorthodox, as Trump ignored candidates with government experience and instead tapped CEOs, billionaires, and titans of industry.
The president-elect is tapping fellow billionaire Wilbur Ross as Secretary of Commerce.
Trump has nominated Betsy DeVos as the education secretary. She is a conservative activist and also a billionaire GOP donor.
Mr. Trump choosing Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson for Secretary of State.
Unlike these people, Russell Vought was not nearly as well known, at least to people outside of Washington. But Vought had once worked for Congressman, now Vice President Mike Pence, who was overseeing the president's transition team. Pence wanted Vought in the new administration, and he offered him a position as senior advisor in the Office of Management and Budget. Well, I'm sorry. Was I snoring? It's just that even thinking about something called the Office of Management and Budget makes everyone just a bit drowsy.
The Office of Management and Budget is the kind of federal agency that makes your eyes glaze over. You hear those words in order and you immediately want to think about something else.
Which for Russell Vought was a good thing. It wasn't a department or a position that the American public was paying a lot of attention to. But Vought was very familiar with the Office of Management and Budget. Budgets were his love language. He'd been working on them since his earliest days on Capitol Hill, back when he was trying to strip out child nutrition assistance and disability benefits for veterans. For Vought, a job at the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, was an incredible opportunity to be at the helm of America's nerve center, the office that's responsible for the federal budget and for overseeing all of the government's agencies.
Every goddamn thing that goes through the White House and basically goes through the federal government has to at some point go through OMB. They understand how the federal government works, where the money goes, how it gets spent, where to cut it in ways that maybe won't attract a lot of attention, but will do a lot of damage.
The possibility for serious damage began on March 13th, 2017, when President Trump signed an executive order that called for reorganizing the executive branch. The initiative would be led by the Office of Management and Budget, and the director of the OMB at the time, Mick Mulvaney, put Russell Vought in charge of the initiative. But first, Vought needed Senate confirmation for his role. So in April 2017, the Trump administration nominated Russ Vought as deputy director of OMB. His confirmation hearing was contentious.
The budget that Mr. Vought helped write
is perhaps the most destructive and cruel budget ever presented by a president.
And then there was this exchange about executive power with then Democratic Senator Kamala Harris.
Last week, the Department of Justice's Office of Legal Counsel released an opinion that executive branch agencies have no legal obligation to respond to congressional requests for information.
The Office of Legal Counsel opinion that Harris was referring to denied individual members of Congress the authority to make official inquiries about the executive branch. Democrats viewed it as yet another attempt to block congressional oversight and amass more power in the executive branch, which was exactly why Kamala Harris had raised the issue during Russell Vought's confirmation hearing.
So my question is, do you believe you have a legal obligation to respond? Is your answer yes?
Senator, I'd have to go and understand further the OLC opinion to know what obligations I would be subject to.
In other words, Congress, you're not the boss of me. Despite the Democrats' clear opposition, the Senate voted along party lines to confirm Vought's position to the OMB on February 28, 2018.
The yeas are 49, the nays are 49, the Senate being equally divided. The Vice President votes in the affirmative, and the nomination is confirmed.
Again, that was 2018, not 2017. That's right. It had taken nearly a year for Russ Vought to be confirmed, and his confirmation required Vice President Mike Pence to break the tie. Russ Vought immediately lived up to his opponent's fears about executive overreach. One of his first recommendations involved using long-forgotten parts of the 1974 Congressional Budget and Impoundment Control Act that we heard about in Episode 1. You know, after President Nixon blocked Missouri's highway funds.
Hey, see that, kids? That's a St. Louis Arch.
That old law allowed for a procedure known as rescission, in which the president, via the OMB, could request to cancel previously appropriated funding.
We can thank Richard Nixon for that. Ronald Reagan used it, and several other subsequent presidents used it, but Vought sees it as a very powerful tool in the toolkit during Trump 1.0 and attempts to push through one of the biggest rescission bills in American history.
Russ Vought suggested that President Trump request a $15 billion rescission, asking for money back on farming programs, flood prevention, the Children's Health Insurance Fund, public housing, federal highways, and money used to fight Ebola overseas. The measure was barely defeated in the Senate, sunk by 2 members of Trump's own Republican Party.
The yeas are 48, the nays are 50.
It was an embarrassing moment for the Trump administration, and it served as yet another reminder for Vought that Congress and his own party were obstacles to the president's plans. Then came the issue of Trump's border wall, which Congress refused to fund.
Partial government shutdown looms at midnight tonight after a long day at the U.S. Capitol. House Republicans already voted to add $5.7 billion for more security on the southern border, including a physical wall, something Democrats oppose.
As the government went into a 35-day shutdown, Russ Vought came up with a way to get around Congress and their power of the purse: declare a national emergency. In doing so, the Trump administration could move money out of the Department of Defense and put it towards the border wall. Here's Andy Kroll again.
They're throwing different things at the wall when it comes to executive power and this idea of an imperial presidency. This was a quite a pliable use of the national emergency authority.
Now, presidents have declared national emergencies over the years. President Bush used a national emergency declaration on 9/11. President Obama used one to deal with the 2009 H1N1 swine flu epidemic. National emergency declarations are meant to be used for unexpected, fast-moving events, actual emergencies. Unless, of course, you're President Trump.
Basically just gin up more funding for a presidential policy priority, something that didn't fit the normal description of an emergency and seemed very much intended just to get around a Congress that wasn't giving the president what he wanted.
The pushback was considerable. Members of Congress viewed Trump's action as a direct attack on their constitutional authority. Even some Republicans were upset. Here's Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee.
I've got concerns about this legal framework. This is not about my disagreement with or disapproval of the president or his approach to border security. I think all those things need to happen. But this law, Mr. President, is wrong.
Over and over again in Donald Trump's first term, Russ Vought helped the president test the limitations of the executive branch. Only months after conservatives were deriding Obama's executive power grabs, they were pressing the boundaries of executive power themselves, experimenting with how far the rules would bend and how much power they could accumulate. And of all the examples of this, the most significant came towards the end of President Trump's first term. Between late 2018 and early 2019, Congress had appropriated several $100 million in security assistance for Ukraine in their war against Russia. But in the summer of 2019, Russ Vought advised the White House to block the money's release.
Russ Vought and his acolytes believe that the president has that power to choke off this money, to stop the sort of fundamental functioning of our democratic system of government.
This move is called impoundment. And again, if you remember back to episode 1 of this season of Master Plan, that term should sound familiar. President Nixon used impoundment to try to get around Congress's power of the purse. Congress smacked him down with that 1974 law that reinforced impoundment's illegality. Nixon had failed at adding impoundment to his imperial president's toolbox, but that did not dissuade Donald Trump from giving this trick another try. At the time, many assumed that the Trump administration withheld the money for Ukraine to try to exercise control over Ukraine's president. Trump wanted Ukraine's government to investigate Trump's political rival in the 2020 presidential election, Democrat Joe Biden. But as Andy Kroll told us, there was likely more to Trump's actions than just politics.
I really think if you go back and look at the major flashpoints of Russ Vaught's career in politics and in government, they are all bringing you to this inflection point where he says, we're going to use this tool called impoundment. We are going to put forward this argument that says the president can unilaterally thwart the will of Congress because the president disagrees with what Congress is saying we should spend money on.
We do not have time to go into the details of the Ukraine scandal. That'll have to be another podcast. But the important thing to note here for our story is that Trump, advised by Russ Vought, tried to use the imperial presidency playbook to circumvent Congress. The administration knew that what they were doing was legally fraud. When Trump learned a whistleblower complaint had been filed, he quickly released the money in September 2019. Just weeks later, that complaint reached Congress, and Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi initiated an investigation into the whole affair. By December, Congress was pushing back hard against the executive branch's power grab and its unilateral action that tried to stop the Ukraine money. The House voted along party lines to impeach the president.
The yeas are 230, the nays are 197. Article 1 is adopted.
In January 2020, the Government Accountability Office, a nonpartisan government watchdog, came to the conclusion that the Trump administration had violated federal law by withholding aid from Ukraine. At around this same time, the Kingmakers had been educating Trump on the unitary executive theory, and Trump had started publicly beating the drum for it as a way to defend himself against all sorts of charges of executive overreach.
Then I have an Article 2, which gives the president powers that you wouldn't believe.
I'm just saying a president under Article 2, it's very strong. Read it. Do you have Article 2? Read it.
And amid that drumbeat, in February 2020, the Republican-led U.S. Senate voted to acquit Trump in the Ukraine scandal.
On this article of impeachment, the Senate adjudges that respondent Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is not guilty as charged.
The acquittal didn't just exonerate Trump personally. It effectively normalized the impoundment power grab for Trump and for future presidents. For Trump and Russell Vought, the lesson learned from the whole Ukraine impoundment affair was not one of disgrace.
That impoundment episode is very much a prelude to what is to come.
But the second Trump administration would have to wait, because in 2020, Trump absolutely lost his re-election bid.
Joe Biden poised to become the 46th president, the first person to defeat an incumbent president in nearly 3 decades.
As we all no doubt remember, Donald Trump tried to have the election results overturned in what could be seen as the ultimate attempt at an executive power grab. Trump first tried to use the legal system and go through the courts, and then, when that didn't work, Trump opted to incite his followers to violence.
We fight like hell, and if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Brother, we're boots on the ground here. We're moving on to Capitol now.
Effectively a riot. 1349 hours declaring it a riot. We have been told that we lost ground.
Protesters have now broken into the U.S. Capitol.
Put them down. 1 by 1.
For many members of Trump's circle, this was the last straw, as Andy Kroll pointed out.
Betsy DeVos is running for the exits. Elaine Chao is running for the exits. Mitch McConnell is repudiating Donald Trump on the Senate floor. I mean, Mitch McConnell, Betsy DeVos of all people.
Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education. Elaine Chao, the Secretary of Transportation. Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. And these were just a few of the Republicans who disavowed Trump. But not everyone did.
In the midst of this, Vought does not do the obvious thing, seemingly, and distance himself from the president.
Nope. Russell Vought did the opposite.
He reaffirms his loyalty to Trump and gets to work starting this think tank and grassroots operation to keep the MAGA torch aflame and start planning for a Trump campaign and re-election.
We're going to take one more quick break. Before we continue, I just want to remind you, the reporting we do here at The Lever is listener-supported and funded. If you'd like to help us keep doing this kind of work, please consider becoming a paid subscriber right now. As thanks, you'll receive ad-free episodes of Master Plan weeks before everyone else, and you'll get exclusive bonus content. We'll be right back. It's not very often that you get a total do-over in life. You don't get to restart your marriage from scratch, taking advantage of all the knowledge that you've accumulated over the years to do it better. Real life isn't like a video game where you're bouncing along as Mario and you get eaten by a piranha plant. But then you pop back to life, nail the jump, knock out Bowser, and rescue the princess. The only person I can think of who's had a real-life version of this is Donald Trump, a guy who went bankrupt multiple times and then came back as the star of a TV show where he was cast as a brilliant business genius, which helped eventually vault him into the presidency. And then somehow, after that, he got another do-over.
And this is what's so providential about the election being stolen in 2020.
This is Trump's political guru, Steve Bannon, in 2025, explaining Trump's most recent do-over.
He had 4 years in exile. We were able to actually get some traction to build the MAGA movement, particularly with low information and low propensity voters, so that President Trump could win the presidency.
A victory in the 2024 election meant a do-over, not just for Trump, but for the Kingmakers. These ardent loyalists left the White House in 2021, but they did not leave Washington. Instead, they geared up for battle. They were Kingmakers in exile, and there were two in particular whose names should seem familiar. One was Stephen Miller, the first-term Trump White House advisor, founded America First Legal, a conservative legal group whose goal was to fight the, quote, radical left in the courts and in the media.
America First Legal touts itself as the long-awaited answer to the ACLU.
And the other kingmaker in exile was Russ Vought, who founded the Center for Renewing America, a think tank that traded in extreme conservative values. CRA's mission was to keep the Trump agenda alive in the Biden era, with the idea that Trump might just get a second term. But as the Kingmakers formulated plans for an even more assertive executive branch, they simultaneously screamed bloody murder about any attempts by President Joe Biden to assert presidential power. Like when Biden took executive action to forgive student loan debt.
They're running the republic like he's a king, and it's not fair because a Republican gets into the presidency and they run it like a president.
It was the same kind of thing when Biden shifted immigration enforcement.
That is acting more like a king than it is a president.
And it happened again when Biden issued vaccine mandates during the worst global pandemic in modern history.
All of these judges are saying that President Biden's exceeding his authority.
In the minds of conservative kingmakers like Russ Vought, it was okay if some presidents pushed the limits of executive power, as long as they were in line with an extremely right-wing conservative worldview. But it was not okay if you were a Democratic president like Joe Biden.
He thinks, like President Obama did, that with a pen and a phone, he could circumvent the law.
The first-term Trump administration had used impoundment, rescissions, and executive orders to get around Congress and the Constitution. But any time President Biden used similar tools, he ran into accusations of authoritarianism from the right. Here's Russ Vought in 2022.
Joe Biden's been in this town for 45, 50 years. He knows the impact of these policies. And so he's continuing to pursue them. Why? Because he's ideologically committed to the results, and that's more power.
You might be wondering, isn't this the same Joe Biden that Republicans accused of being a doddering old man who didn't even know what was going on?
Who likes Sleepy Joe? He sleeps like I've never seen anybody sleep like that.
President Joe Biden there leaving the stage, trips and falls.
So how can Joe Biden be both incompetent and also a power-hungry mastermind monster hell-bent on ruining America?
Crooked Joe Biden, the worst president in the history of our country, is destroying our country.
In the minds of men like Russell Vought, the answer to that question was the deep state.
Vought clearly came out of the first Trump administration believing that there was this nefarious deep state and that these people needed to be purged from the government.
These federal employees were, to quote Vought, woke and weaponized. And Vought depicted them as embedded throughout the agencies of the U.S. government.
Vought is coming around to this idea that these agencies are out of control, run by unelected experts and civil servants and scientists who think that they can just make policy on their own.
But Vought believed that this so-called administrative state could be brought to heel. This unconstitutional, bloated, undemocratic apparatus could be reined in. It could be co-opted to create a mirror world version of itself, one that served a powerful president and a conservative agenda. And the plans for how to do that were part of something we heard about at the very beginning of this episode, Project 2025.
The idea was to have a blueprint and a whole administration in waiting, really ready for the next conservative president, whoever that might be.
That's David Graham, a writer at The Atlantic and the author of The Project, How Project 2025 is Reshaping America.
It was put together in 3 parts. The biggest one was this 900-something page document called Mandate for Leadership, which lays out what specifically they'd like to do in basically every department of the government, as well as in the White House.
The Mandate for Leadership. We spent all of episode 2 of Master Plan talking about the first Mandate for Leadership, which was developed by the Heritage Foundation for the possibility of an incoming conservative Reagan presidency. You might remember that Ronald Reagan eventually adopted about 2/3 of the recommendations in the original 1,100-page Mandate for Leadership.
They consciously positioned themselves in Project 2025 as picking up on the model of the original 1980 Mandate for Leadership.
Guided by what was now a much more aggressive Heritage Foundation, the conservative right was trying to repeat that success, or even exceed it.
You can see a lot of straight lines from what Reagan was doing. And I think what sets it apart is this, I would say, really much more radical approach to power, a willingness to use executive power in ways that conservative think tanks traditionally were critical of.
The new book, known colloquially as Project 2025, was officially titled Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. And like its ancestor, it had chapters covering every aspect of government, all the cabinet departments, the independent regulatory agencies, the Export-Import Bank, the Small Business Administration, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This new Mandate for Leadership included directives on how to use executive authority to get all these government entities to fall in line with the conservative agenda. And it included suggestions for specific executive orders that the president could issue to make that all happen.
The idea that if things are part of the executive branch, then they should be under the control of the president, and neither the Congress nor the courts nor anyone else should be able to interfere with that.
Appropriately, Kingmaker Russ Vought himself wrote Chapter 2, in which he argued for the expansion of executive power and quoted Article 2 of the Constitution. Here's what it said. That enormous power is not vested in departments or agencies, in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations or other equities and interests close to the government. The president must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. That bureaucracy had been a problem in Trump's first term. Russ Vought hoped to use the unitary executive theory to crush it under the heel of his goose-stepping boots for the second one. Now, this newest version of the mandate for leadership was just part one of Project 2025, the blueprint for action. There was part two, the administration in waiting. Vought gave talks about this in 2023, and videos of those talks were later leaked to ProPublica in 2024. In these speeches, Russ Vought described it as a shadow government.
We are trying to build almost a shadow Office of Management and Budget. We're trying to build a shadow Office of Legal Counsel.
And the government in waiting that Russ Vought was building would be staffed by loyalists. Here's David Graham again.
He feels that many of the people who served in the first Trump administration were lazy, or they were out for glory, or they were trying to sabotage Trump. Vought also felt like the civil service was slow-walking a lot of the things that Trump wanted to do.
In that same leaked recording that we just heard, Russ Vought explained exactly what he planned to do to the civil servants and those he cast as traitors.
We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not want to go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. We want their funding to be shut down. We want to put them in trauma.
Russ Vought and the other architects of Project 2025 began developing a list of loyalists, a registry of people who could be called on to fill government positions.
They also had a database of about, they said 10,000 people who they had identified as potential political appointees who would receive some training.
So to recap, mandate for leadership was the blueprint for action. The list of personnel were the people who would execute that blueprint.
And they want people who are going to do what they're told to do, even if it might be illegal.
And the third element of Project 2025 was a playbook for the first 180 days of Trump's second term. The Heritage Foundation had come up with a collection of policies in mandate for leadership, but they needed a guide for how to achieve as many of those goals as possible.
When I think about how Project 2025 works, I see a bunch of ideas, and then I see Vought laying out the way to get them all done. And that is by seizing control of the executive branch, making OMB the command center for the executive branch, grabbing control of the Justice Department, changing staffing in the executive branch.
And at the center of that plan to seize power for the president in Trump's second term was one of Vought's biggest unfinished projects from Trump's first term, something called Schedule F. I know, it sounds like a tax form, but it's less boring than that, and arguably worse. Schedule F was the name for a new kind of classification for federal employees, and it removed long-standing protections for career civil servants. Russ Vought saw these people as the deep state, the non-loyal traitors that had slow-walked Trump's agenda throughout the first term. He wanted them gone, and he tried to implement Schedule F in the last days of Trump's first term, in October 2020. Trump even signed an executive order pushing it through.
President Trump has a new executive order that could fundamentally restructure the federal workforce, while also allowing political and other considerations to affect hiring.
That 2020 order came too late to take effect. And when Trump lost the 2020 presidential election, President Biden immediately signed his own executive order rescinding it. But in planning for a second Trump administration or another conservative administration, Russ Vought anticipated that Schedule F would be reinstated. That would allow him and the other kingmakers to establish a whole army of loyalists, effectively turning the entire executive branch into the president's royal court. Then there were the independent regulatory agencies. These had been established by Congress within the executive branch, but these agencies' leaders could not be fired by the president for no reason. One of Russ Vought's main goals was to end these agencies' independence, as Vought himself explained in an interview with Tucker Carlson.
There are no independent agencies. Congress may have viewed them as such, SEC or the FCC, CFPB, the whole alphabet soup, but that is not something that the Constitution understands. The whole notion of an independent agency should be thrown out.
This is the same fight that we heard about in episode 4, when Ronald Reagan's Attorney General Ed Meese and his fellow Reaganites sought to overturn the independent counsel laws in that case, Morrison v. Olson. Vought and the Kingmakers were still fighting that battle.
Particularly with the Department of Justice, in which there's literally no law. All it is precedent from the Watergate era that the attorney general and those lawyers don't work for the president.
A new Trump administration would also mean revisiting impoundment, pushing back on the idea that withholding congressionally approved funds was illegal. Trump himself previewed that possibility during his campaign for re-election in 2023.
I will then use the president's long-recognized impoundment power to squeeze the bloated federal bureaucracy for massive savings. This will help quickly to stop inflation and slash the deficit.
And all of these tools would be ready for use on day one, thanks to Russ Vought, who oversaw the process of drafting hundreds of executive orders, regulations, and internal memos. As Vought himself said, the goal was to avoid the chaos of Trump's first term and move with incredible speed.
A new Trump administration must move quickly and decisively to turn the tables on the left by using the powers that have been delegated to the American government.
Here's the thing. None of this was happening in secret. Work on Project 2025 officially began in April 2022, 6 months before it was even clear who the Republican candidate would be. A year later, by April 2023, the Heritage Foundation published Mandate for Leadership, The Conservative Promise. Russ Vought was not a man who had sought the limelight in the past, but he went on a PR blitz for conservative ideas.
This is going to be an action center that's designed to rally the 70 million people across this country that support President Trump's ideas, the America First agenda.
We need to be a country, a nation that's for God, for country, and for community.
That's what we're talking about when we are talking about woke and weaponized federal government.
And that's what he was saying publicly. Privately, Russ Vought made it clear that the purpose of Project 2025 was to alter the nation's very foundation. In those secret recordings made by the Center for Climate Reporting, Vought spelled out his views on the separation of church and state.
I think you have to rehabilitate Christian nationalism.
In leaked speeches obtained by ProPublica, including the one we heard earlier about putting bureaucrats in trauma, Vought also talked about using martial law.
We want to be able to shut down the riots and not have the legal community or the defense community to come in and say that's an inappropriate use of what you're trying to do.
And Vought also suggested that Trump had secured the ultimate political endorsement, the Almighty himself.
And guess what? We have in Donald Trump a man who is so uniquely positioned to serve this role, a man whose own interests perfectly align with the interests of the country. That is nothing more than a gift of God.
It certainly seemed like Trump was blessed by the good Lord. In July 2024, the Supreme Court handed down a long-awaited decision in a case known as Trump v. United States.
The conservative majority finding the presumptive GOP nominee must receive sweeping immunity for any official acts taken during his presidency.
The case stemmed from special counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Trump's role in the January 6, 2021 attacks on the U.S. Capitol. Trump claimed that he could not be prosecuted, and in a monumental 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court agreed. Stacked as it was with unitary executive fans, the Roberts Court had now given presidents broad immunity from criminal prosecution. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor issued this warning.
The court effectively creates a law-free zone around the president. This new official acts immunity now lies about like a loaded weapon for any president that wishes to place his own interests, his own political survival, or his own financial gain above the interests of the nation.
For Trump and the Kingmakers, it was an enormous victory and a step forward in securing more power for the executive branch. Less than 2 weeks later, on July 13th, 2024, Trump once again seemed to have God in his corner.
Former US President Donald Trump has survived an attempt on his life at a campaign rally.
Cameras captured Trump rising from the stage, blood on his ear, fist raised, as Secret Service agents surrounded him. Within minutes, the image became an icon. Flags, posters, memes. And for Trump's most devoted followers, the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania became proof of destiny.
I believe that my life was saved that day in Butler for a very good reason. I was saved by God to make America great again.
But despite God's many blessings, Trump was facing increasing criticism for his association with Project 2025. At this point in time, summer 2024, These ultra-conservative plans were all over the mainstream media.
Project 2025 includes a massive overhaul of the federal government as we know it.
One that would turn the Justice Department against critics, deport millions of people in the U.S. illegally, fire perhaps tens of thousands of government staff deemed insufficiently loyal.
They're talking about how they remake the U.S. government in their image.
During the Democratic National Convention, speakers brandished an oversized copy of Mandate for Leadership on stage.
You ever seen a document that could kill a small animal and democracy at the same time?
Critics pointed out that the whole project was a plot to undermine the Constitution's system of checks and balances and concentrate power in the hands of a truly imperial president. Public opinion polls showed that as many as 57% of the American electorate viewed Project 2025 in a negative light. And Trump, he responded by disavowing the entire enterprise, like during his September 2024 debate with Kamala Harris.
I have nothing to do with Project 2025. That's out there. I haven't read it. I don't want to read it purposely. I'm not going to read it.
Trump went further, calling some of its ideas, quote, absolutely ridiculous and abysmal. And he insisted he had, quote, no idea who's behind it.
Move on! Nothing to see here! Please disperse!
But behind closed doors, Russell Vought told those undercover reporters not to take Trump's disavowals seriously.
He's raised money for our organization. He's very supportive of what we do.
The branding didn't matter. The infrastructure did. Project 2025 wasn't about winning a public argument. It was about being ready after winning an election. And then the votes were counted.
NBC News can now project that Donald Trump has won the state of Wisconsin, which means he is the winner of this race and will return to the White House as this country's 47th president.
And like Mandate for Leadership with Ronald Reagan, Project 2025 now had their man in place. All the pieces were aligned for Trump's conservative juggernaut to move forward, crushing anything in its path, wielding the unitary executive theory like a cudgel. Their king had arrived. After the 2024 election, Russell Vought did get his do-over, and he returned to the Office of Management and Budget as part of Trump 2.0.
He has risen to become, I personally think, one of the one or two most important people in the second Trump administration, and someone whose worldview explains a lot about why this administration has turned out the way it has so far.
Russ Vought believes in strict Christian nationalism and extreme fiscal conservatism. And Vought knows that he can't get what he wants with a healthy democracy or the will of the majority.
We are in a culture war, and you've got to be able to articulate truth even when the culture and the society is against you. Because with confrontation, you have the ability to educate the country about what is true and what is not true.
Russ Vought needs a unitary executive with unchecked presidential power. And Donald Trump, in his second term, has pushed the unitary executive theory to its furthest point so far.
Who's in charge, right? And that's why you get to this unitary executive theory, of which it all comes together in the office of the president.
That's Steve Bannon in July 2025, just about 6 months after his king had reascended to the throne. Steve Bannon is cavalierly discussing the unitary executive theory in a Frontline interview, which goes to show you how mainstream this all had become.
That's one of the keys to the unitary theory of the executive, is being the chief executive officer of the United States government, being the commander-in-chief of the military, the chief magistrate and the chief law enforcement officer of the United States.
But much of what we attribute to Trump was likely whispered into his ear by Russ Vought. As one example, Vought literally drafted that infamous memo in the early part of Trump's second term that cited executive authority to unilaterally halt all federal funding that had been approved by Congress.
Hundreds of billions of dollars in federal spending on everything from assistance to farmers, to Head Start programs, to disaster relief and public transportation.
As Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency took a chainsaw to the federal government, Russ Vought applauded. Vought was called on to testify in front of the House Budget Committee in June 2026. And when he was asked about the future of DOGE, he suggested DOGE's cuts would be permanent.
I think it made some really important strides. And so many of the fruits of their labor are sprinkled all across the government.
And in Trump's second term, Vought has carried out his previously thwarted plans for Schedule F.
This is another executive order on reforms to the federal workforce, sir.
It's a big one.
And programs like USAID, they've met their end.
Thousands of staff and contractors were fired, while humanitarian aid to some of the world's most vulnerable populations was stopped.
And Russ Vought managed to get a rescission of foreign aid, an act that was upheld by the Supreme Court.
The White House said, hey, we're not actually even going to ask you to approve it this time. We're just letting you know we're going to withhold $40 billion in foreign aid. And now the Supreme Court has come forward 6-3 to say that the White House is allowed at this point to withhold that funding.
All of this was done with zero congressional authorization. And there were plenty more examples of this, but there's not really any point in reviewing everything we're currently living through. I'm going to assume that you've been paying attention to what's been happening over the last 2 years, and you don't need to relive the experience. Instead, let's look forward to the future. What happens after Trump? What happens if the Democrats win back the White House? Should they use all the power that's been concentrated in the executive branch to return to our system of checks and balances? Redistribute power back to Congress? Be like Galadriel in Lord of the Rings?
I will diminish and go into the West.
Or should a new Democratic president use all that power that Trump and the Kingmakers have amassed? Should they use executive authority to pursue an agenda that would rival FDR's New Deal? Should they use executive power to impose bold climate change policies and shut down tax loopholes for billionaires and stack the court? The progressive wish list could be reality.
In place of a dark lord, you would have a queen!
All shall love me and despair!
Should they bewail the king-making and the erosion of America's foundational principles? Or should a Democratic president use all this unitary executive power for their agenda?
And I'll call it Agenda 48, because the 48th president of the United States, who's going to be a Democrat, has got to have an agenda that's bold and gets passed right away.
That's coming up on the final episode of Master Plan, The Kingmakers.
Thinking of a master plan.
Master Plan is a production of The Lever. This episode was written and produced by Laura Krantz, with additional writing and production from Jared Jakang-Mayer and me, David Sirota. Fact-checking of this episode by Emma Wilkie. Original music is by Nick Byron Campbell. Sound design and mixing by Amber Devereaux. Legal review by Mike Balkin. Our director of podcast production is Ron Doyle. Special thanks to Andy Kroll for sharing his extensive knowledge of Russell Vought with us, and to ProPublica for the use of their audio. Additional thanks to the Center for Climate Reporting for allowing us to use their audio as well. You can listen and subscribe to Master Plan on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, YouTube Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review or a rating. It really helps. And for ad-free episodes, bonus content, full transcripts with source links, and access to all of The Lever's investigative journalism, head to levernews.com and become a subscriber right now. We're a reader and listener-supported independent outlet. So when you become a subscriber, you're literally making our work possible.